I'm trying to say too much too fast in the beginning, but then it slows down. And in the beginning, I'm going to present the idea of the Apollonian versus the Dionysian, which is a literary conceit that's central to my talk. So hit it anytime. Okay, a lot of you have probably seen this bestseller, The Art of Tidying Up, and it's a trend that I'm showing because it illustrates how our culture favors the Apollonian. Apollo was the god of light and the rational and order, which is a good thing, as opposed to Dionysus, the dark and wine and dance. And this is a photocopy that my mother sent me years ago, which represents maybe the more Dionysian side. And my brother and I grew up in Stowe, and my mother was divorced and working, and she sent this to me as a vindication of her style, which favored survival and the imagination over housekeeping. And the article is about Iris Murdoch, and I have to read one quote by her. Let me see. Iris Murdoch said, "Every man needs two women, a quiet homemaker and a thrilling nymph. Obviously, Iris preferred being a nymph, as my mother could only wish to be." And up here, you see on the left 2 shots inside the house my brother and I grew up in Stowe. And on the right are photos of Francis Bacon in his studio. And perhaps the Brits are more accepting of eccentrics, or perhaps the puritanical background of Americans has us more obsessed with tidiness. Now we're fast forwarding a couple of decades to 1976. After graduating from UVM, I lived in a warehouse down the alley behind Nectar's, because for an artist, space is the most important thing for your work. And Nectar's was my Dionysian living room at night. And in the rational light of day, I was a secretary in UVM's home ec department. One of my tasks was making copies in the mimeograph room, and every day I'd see these huge stacks of perfectly good paper in the trash because they had Mimeo ink blots on them. I'd take them back to the studio, tear them up in a blender, and make paper pulp. And I've always been a waste not person, but this was the beginning of a particular fixation on saving paper. I'd cast the paper pulp into plaster body molds that I made from different friends. And in 1977, I had my first solo show in Montreal. And both of these photos are by Marion Ettlinger, who a lot of you know. And in fact, the top figure was her. Fast forward another couple of decades, and I have my own studio, barn, house, and sculpture garden in Winooski. Yay, Winooski. And although I'm best known for my sculpture, the work I'm talking about tonight is all about paper, or is on paper. So ever since the mimeograph days, I can't bear to let go of a good piece of paper. I still have some blank sheets and a sketch back dating as far back as 1973 when I was an art student in London. And what some people might consider hoarding, I consider creative compost. So unlike the environment I grew up in, I do attempt to organize old drawings, images, monotypes, and different kinds of paper. I also cherish the history of the buildings on my property. And on the lower left, you see this garage that was made out of recycled wood that's now my studio, and this was built many years before I moved in. So what do I do with all this paper? One very simple thing is I take, for instance, these are experiments I made with pressing leaves and plants into paper, and then I do some life drawing, and I look at these pieces of paper with different plant forms and see what relates to the pose, and then draw on top of it. I also save my obsessive to-do lists, which of course are written on recycled paper that has printing on the back. And I've used these lists in collage and sculpture as a way of inserting my everyday life into the artwork. And so you see a couple of examples there where first I printed plants and then I collaged in to-do lists. And this year, just since February, I've been doing a lot with old pieces of paper. So what you see has just been completed in the last couple of months. And as I cut up images for collage and some of these plant prints that you see on the left, then tiny little leftovers accumulate, and I use them in smaller collages that you see on the right. And this is a good before and after example. So on the left is a monotype that I did in 1992, I think. And they're both, this is large, it's 40 inches high, and I still like these early monotypes, but the thing is when you hold on to something that long, it's fun. I'm collaborating with my younger self, and time gives you distance, perspective, and freedom. And when pieces have been kicking around for a number of years, they're less precious and easier to play with. And those wings that you see on the right, I've held on to those for 40 years. So that's how long I can hold on to a piece of paper. Okay, on the upper left is a monoprint titled Seascape, and I printed many of them in darker and lighter versions. And I thought it was great, but since some time has passed, there are very few people that see all the faces in the clouds and waves. So I'm working over all of those on a series that I call Fleet. And then these are smaller monoprints that were studies for the Seascape. And I'm just showing this so you can see the originals on the bottom and then how I collaged and painted into them. And that's the beauty of having more than one of something, is that you feel looser about experimenting. And I also do that in my sculpture by making molds and casting, so I have multiples to play with. I have a lot of monoprints that are duds, like the one on the lower left. So you can see that that's just a jumping off point for the very complicated painted collage above it. And then the original on the lower right there, I turned it upside down, I painted into it, and then collaged onto it. So these are some paper towels that I've been saving. I use them as blotters while pressing plants into paper. And I did this in Spain, and I brought them all the way back from Spain. But I think they're beautiful and I love them, but I don't know what I'm going to do with them yet. And I have to apologize for the last slide coming up because it's a shameless plug for workshops that I'm offering in my studio this summer. You can talk to me or email me if you're interested. And I just want to end with a quote from the famous anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss. "Objects are what matter. Only they carry the evidence that throughout the centuries something really happened among human beings." Thank you.